Well, good evening, everybody. So I know Pamela's already on here. As my great friend at Paul's Photo, Mark, says when he does his live things, is give me like a Yahoo or a Wahoo or something so I know you're there, because for some reason it's showing me 0 people are attending this evening. And I already know there's at least 1 and 2. So, hey, Corey, how are you? I got Pamela on here and Corey. That's so annoying. I'm going to have to email these guys and say, hey, what is up? Because I like to know who's here. So I'm just not talking to the screen, I guess. Hey, B, you remembered. Oh. Hey, Paul. It's like all my regulars, man. I love this. Oh. Well, we'll get started here momentarily. I actually did a slideshow this evening again. Maybe it'll be a new thing. I don't know. Hey, Connie. So I got Connie and Paul and B and Corey and Pamela. I know there's probably a few hanging out there too that haven't commented. Ooh, I look a little warm this evening. Must be my white balance. Oh well. We will contend with what it is. Maybe I should do something on white balance here in the future. And I shouldn't be drinking coffee at 8:01 in the evening. It's probably why I haven't been sleeping this week. Usually it doesn't affect me. But you know what? We will momentarily get started here. We'll see if we can get a few more to show up. Hopefully everybody is having a wonderful Friday evening. I apologize for switching the times around. I've been kind of inconsistent since December, not September. Sweet baby Jesus. And then I think next week I'm going to have to do it Sunday night, but we'll talk about all that shenanigans at the end. So, well, hopefully, like I said, everybody is having a wonderful week. Wonderful start to the weekend. I know we are headed to Clear Lake tomorrow to the kite flying thingamajigger, so that should be fun. So, you know what, let's kind of get this party started here. So I'm going to pull up this fancy slideshow, and here we are. So, biggest question I get a million times a year is, should I shoot RAW? What is RAW? All that good stuff. So I figured, you know what? Why not do a little bit of RAW? So I've got about 13 slides here this evening. As you know, if you're a regular, throw your questions up as we roll, and I will answer them and try to remember to throw them up on the screen. So I'm going to make everybody participate slightly this evening. I know, curveball. Comment yes if you're shooting RAW and no if you're not. Just curious. It's kind of like I don't want to call it RAW. It's like the holy grail for me, man. Connie's shooting, Corey's shooting. I figured you guys would be. Paul, yes. I figured I'd get a bunch of yeses. I'll be surprised if I get a no. But B is, everybody is at this point. So, right? I mean, so hopefully I'll give you a little bit of information this evening that you can use. So let's get to it. So understanding RAW, really, I call this like the 21st century darkroom. So if you really think about it, to kind of like, I don't know, go back a little bit, you get some people that say, oh, you should shoot JPEG and only JPEG because it's like pure form. And Ansel Adams never, tweaked anything. Oh, that's a big lie. He did. I mean, if you think you go back to this, like the whole RAW thing with post-processing, and everybody says, oh, you shouldn't post-process because it's not true photography. It's not how you size or see it. So, well, maybe, but when I teach intermediate landscape photography for Paul's Photo, I talk about the different types of landscapes, representational, how we saw it. Here in 2 weeks, I'm going to do a show on the reschedule from when I had to miss because of White Sands, is putting the art back in fine art. So maybe we'll have a lively discussion on what is fine art, because I think that's all in the eye of the beholder. But there's always been some form of manipulation in photography. I don't care if it was film, you had the darkroom. So now we shoot pixels and we don't shoot frames. So I like to think of RAW images as like your negative. How many times have you ever worked in the darkroom, or when I worked in countless photo labs in my life, you never once did you put a negative in a carrier and read it in a enlarger, or, throw it in the big fancy Fuji or Kodak machine and it pulls up and you're like, there it is. It's perfect. No, it doesn't work that way. We all know that. It's tweaking. And the more we tweak, I guess, the better. It depends on who you are. But there's always been some form of manipulation within photography. So you have to think of it as this is like, think of the raw file it's a digital negative. It's truly what it is. So let's roll on here to slide 2. So I want to read this little quote by Ansel Adams. It says, "Dodging and burning are the steps to take care of mistakes God made in establishing tonal relationships." I thought that was kind of fun. Like I said before, there's always some form of manipulation, or we dodged and burned in the darkroom. You can dodge and burn in Lightroom or Photoshop or so on and so forth. So, it's one of those things. I mean, yeah, I think got to think of the Ansel Adams prank. To be honest, I'm not a huge Ansel Adams fan. Wah, wah, sorry. But I've seen some of this. I mean, I've got to Joslin Art Museum in Omaha has, I think, the Snake River and the Tetons, and that's probably the only Ansel Adams print I've seen in like true form of life. So maybe I need to see some more. But it was nice. He shot 8x10, I believe, if I remember right. So he had just a really giant, raw file or negative. But it's one of those things. We manipulate and think of that raw file as your negative. So first I'm going to start off with, I messed up my slide. I put, what is a JPEG file? Well, what is a raw file? Well, let's just skip ahead. There we are. Let's start out with what's a raw file. So really, I kind of said it. It's like your digital negative, but a raw file is created from your camera that captures the max amount of everything, of information on your camera sensor. So we've all heard of every time we buy a new camera. It seems like the last 8 years, 10 years of digital, we always ask the question, what's the dynamic range of the new camera? So, how many stops underexposed can we take it, or overexposed, and we can correct that. Some people say, the Nikon, I don't even know what they are anymore, but let's just say, I feel like my Nikon Z6 II, I can push it about 5 stops of dynamic range. It's probably more than that, but I don't go that far. But that raw file, again, digital negative, it's got all that information. Even, don't think that, sometimes you'll look and there's you may have your highlight warnings, your little blinkies on, and you'll see some blown out areas. Most of the time there's no detail there, but I will tell you that you will find information, especially in the sky, when I use the dehaze tool in Lightroom, that I cannot see with the naked eye. It is embedded within that digital photograph. When I start pulling that slider to the right, giving me a little bit more pop in that sky, reduce haze, whatever. Let me go back to this photo here real quick, because this was a good example. It's the one I'm thinking of. Come on. This one. So you can see there's a gradation in the sky from the blue to the orange, or the yellowies and all that. When I photographed that at White Sands, I had solid orange. I kind of skipped over it. I didn't like the sky. It was too much of one color. And I was like, whatever. So I select the sky with the new masking tool in Lightroom, took my dehaze to the right, and boom, I pulled out that color. I could not see that with the naked eye on the actual computer screen or the monitor of the camera, and it was there. So there's lots of things that are hidden within that raw file that you're going to be able to bring out when you know how to edit or post-process. Yeah. So let me talk about this before I forget. So when you have a raw file, you're probably familiar with it. Most people are, but you'll know there's a JPEG file that you can photograph in your set in your camera, and that's .jpeg, right? It's .jpeg file. In RAW, it's not .raw. It's .nef if you're a Nikon user. It's .cr2, so Charlie Romeo 2 for Canon, and I think I'm trying to remember what Sony is. Boy, why can't I remember that? Oh well, they all have their file extensions that's different. So if you have a friend that shoots Canon and you shoot Nikon, or vice versa, or whatever, and you're talking raw files, and you're like, I don't know, I got this .cr2, I have this .nef. What is that? NEF, if I remember right from Nikon, is Nikon electronic file. There's some, maybe if you're on the Jeopardy game someday and you need some money, there you go. And then when you get into a lot of your JPEGs, that just stands for Joint Experts Group. I believe it's the people who created the JPEG file. So it's always an interesting, boy, things are getting out of hand here. So when you have let's talk about JPEG first, because this is where most people start out at. Your camera can shoot RAW plus JPEG, or it can only shoot RAW, or it can only shoot RAW. Yeah, so only shoot RAW, only shoot JPEG, or do both. Sorry, got lost in thought there. So you could do RAW plus JPEG. Let's start out with the process of RAW plus JPEG. I shoot straight RAW file. One, I don't care to shoot and have two files. I got enough hard drives in this place already. I don't need any more. So I don't need to take any more, space up on laptop and hard drives and wherever my files are stored. So a lot of people will say, well, I shoot RAW plus JPEG because the JPEG might be fine and be perfect and I can manipulate it from there. That's totally true fact. You can do that. That is fine. They use the RAW file as a backup file in case they need to go farther with it. Like I said, I don't like to shoot both. I don't need two files or two of everything laying around. So I just go RAW. Why not? If it's there, I need it. Guess what? It's the only file I have. I don't have to manage. As we all know, file management within itself is a complete and utter chaos mess some days, let alone have two files. And it's not like we can look at a file A and file B and say, okay, this is JPEG, this is RAW. We can't unless we go into that file naming sequence, and then things get all messy. So, but I'm not going to say that JPEG is wrong. It's totally well. Start there. I mean, you can still shoot JPEG. Let's say I'm going to do a picture of, I don't know, a snapshot, not a photograph. I think there's a difference. Maybe that's something I'll talk about some night too, photographs versus snapshots. Let's say I'm just taking a snapshot, clickety-click of the camera. I'm documenting something. That's how I look at snapshots. Am I going to shoot a snapshot in RAW? No. Or, somebody's asked me, oh, can you just take a couple pictures of us? Sure. I do it in JPEG because I don't need the RAW file. It's probably more than likely don't. So I can switch it over to JPEG. Now, I'm notorious for getting to switch back. So most of the time, I just leave it where it be and leave it on RAW. Because the more things you change, the more things you got to remember to change back later on. But again, JPEG is a great place to start. Kind of a quick story from PhotoPro days is I had a gal come in and she's like, I can't, my files are gone. They're freaking out. I did this wedding and all the files are gone. But they're on the camera, but they won't show up on my computer. I don't understand. And they show not found, and she's freaking out. So I'm like, hold on, let's take a look. Opened up a file. They opened up on our computer. Well, duh, guess what? I said, are you shooting RAW files? And she goes, huh, what is a RAW file? Exactly. I said, well, did the explaining of the RAW file. And I said, you have to have software to be able to read RAW files. She's like, I don't have Lightroom. I don't have Photoshop. I don't have other things that can read a RAW file. Regular Mac, Mac might. PC, I know for sure. There's nothing within that Windows viewer that's going to say, hey, I can read a RAW file. Now, that may have changed now, but most softwares will not read a RAW file. So it's great when you start out, you just have a JPEG file because it's universal. That format is compatible with almost every imaging application. The other thing is that JPEG format is also compatible with printers. Like, let's say, when I was at PhotoPro, you could bring a TIFF file, and I won't talk about TIFF files this evening. That's another story. We could not read a TIFF file on the customer side of the counter on that software. Just didn't work. Now, could we read it in the back? Definitely. So, there's things where it won't. You can't take a RAW file. I don't know why you'd want to take a RAW file. Let me take a step back. I'll give you another story because I'm always full of stories. Is why some people just think the holy grail of image files is RAW. And that's fine. I think it is. But the problem I ran into a lot was people are like, I shoot RAW files, but they don't edit. Okay. What's the point of that? Because it's a very, if you look at a RAW file, they can look flat. The color maybe not be there. Especially when you're on the camera side. It'll like, ooh, it's nice and contrasty and vibrant colors. And you put it onto the computer over here and everything's a little flat. Well, that's because you have those profiles within your camera, Nikon, Sony, we all have them, Canon users, whatever, everybody has them. That's just kind of previewing it on your camera. It's not on the actual file. So therefore, it's not going to save it. And there, so when you go to put it on the computer, it doesn't look the same. So they show up flat. They show up lackluster at best. Why? It's because you are the photographer. You were supposed to take what you either saw out here in front of the lens or what's bouncing around here between your two ears and put that into, the computer software or Lightroom, Photoshop, whatever you use to capture one, and manipulate the photo in post-process to bring out what was there or what you want to be there. So I don't know why people go, well, shoot raw. And that was, I think, a misconception. A lot of people say, I just shoot raw because guess what? It's the best quality. Yes, it is the best quality if you put in the quality. So you can't just, I mean, yes, can I shoot a raw file, not edit it, make it a JPEG? Yes. What's the point? The other thing, like I said, their JPEGs are totally 100% compatible with almost everything. Almost. I don't think I've ever come across a thing that didn't read a JPEG. The other thing too is the advantage is size of a JPEG file. Not saying it's tiny, but it's not huge. It's not like ginormous. Like I convert a lot of my images from raw file to a TIFF file to print because it's the bigger file. Right now, I think I pulled out one of my White Sands images last night, put it in TIFF, exported it to the desktop because I was going to make some prints of it. Or that was last week, sorry, for a thing I did. It was like a 190 megabyte file. That's huge. That's like unlimited size of printing for me for what I'm going to do. So a JPEG is nice because they're smaller files. And it's super suitable for uploading to the interwebs. Everything that you see on my Facebook page, my website, my social media presence is all JPEG. I don't load TIFF files because one, it takes forever, even with our 100 megabyte internet speed. And who needs a TIFF file out onto the interwebs anyway? Because Facebook is just going to shrink it down and some more, reduce quality. Now there are settings you can do in a JPEG, which is another story for a later time, where you can set certain settings based off social media, blah, 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 and get a good quality photo. So again, really what it equals down to is smaller the file, the less storage space we need too. We're not running, terabytes. I remember when 2 gigabytes was a huge memory card, and then we went to 4, what was it, 2 gigabytes and like 8 gigabytes, and went to 16, and now I'm right over there on my desk is a 128 gigabyte memory card. That thing held over 1,200 raw images. That's gigantuous. I actually bought that for the podcast recording stuff, and now I guess since I'm not doing the podcast anymore, it will just end up in the camera bag. But it's great because I freaked out when I was at White Sands because I was like, why am I having so many images on this card? And I thought, oh my God, I set it to raw small or raw fine or sorry, JPEG fine or JPEG normal. I'm like, oh crap, I double checked. I'm like, no, it's raw. And I realized I had a 128 gig card sitting over there. So it is what it is. But just remember, there's advantages to JPEG. I'm not going to poo-poo on those and say shouldn't use them at all. There's a time and place in everything in photography, from the lens to the camera to these lights to whatever. Things work best for, but you can use them for anything. Any questions so far? I've just got everybody on the edge of their seat this evening, don't I? So let's talk about disadvantages, because I'm going to talk about disadvantages of RAW as well. Everything has a pro and a con. Sometimes the pros outweigh the cons and vice versa. That's just how life works. There's nothing 100% con-free, unfortunately. Wish there was. But a JPEG, the disadvantage of that is a JPEG it's a lossy compression, and that means that after the image is compressed in JPEG, it loses some certain contents of the image. So do we want to lose detail and things like that? No. But is it going to be so much that it is going to be horrible and non-printable? No. It's just we want to work with the most file information as we can, because we want to be able to have that information there. I'd rather have the information there and not need it than need it and not have it kind of situation. So the other thing is JPEG images don't support layers or layer images. So let's say a graphic designer. I get this at work all the time. Customers, I'm like, send me your art. I prefer an Adobe art file, Adobe Illustrator file, or a PDF or a PNG, preferred AI file. But they're like, here's my JPEG. No, we can't manipulate the JPEG. It doesn't support layers within, Photoshop, things like that. So we can't, if we need to move something and rearrange it, we can't. It's flat and it's all stuck together. So what do our graphic designers have to do? They have to go in and recreate the entire logo or artwork piece from scratch. Then it's guaranteed is not 110% match, unfortunately. So it doesn't support those layers unless you're really doing it. And those are really, like I said, to manipulate and edit that image, not possible in JPEG. unfortunately. But how many of us do that? Very little, right? The other thing is when you do use the lower or the lowest compression level, like I said, your photographs won't capture all those details in the scene. So you're going to lose some stuff, and might not see that. You're going to see a difference between maybe the screens and so on and so forth. So, I mean, really, if you think about it, there's not a lot of disadvantages to JPEG files, really. I mean, like I said, they have their time, they have their place. No questions so far? About halfway done. Oh. So let's talk about oh boy, I cut off half my slideshow with my freaking layer. Oh well. So advantages of RAW file. That's why I'm here, not for you to read it word for word. I will tell you what that first part says. Higher dynamic range. So a JPEG is going to have less dynamic range. So you're going to have a bigger color spectrum, exposure spectrum of this long range of stuff on your file. That's super great because guess what? Let's say like that photo of the yucca plant that I had there. I saw a completely orange sky. At the top, it was light, like a whitish, lighter color. But there was information there I cannot see with my eyeballs. So I start editing and I start bringing all that color back that I saw because that photo looked very, not flat, but my blacks weren't real black. They were a little, I almost said soft. They were a little pale in a sense, or less contrast, let's put it that way. Things like that. The color wasn't there. It was a little flat. Well, what I was seeing with my eye and what the camera produces, because you got to remember, our eyes see a hell of a lot more dynamic range than the camera. Someday, hopefully I will be alive when my eyeballs and the camera can see exactly the same. That would be awesome. But I'm not going to hope and wish anytime soon. So, that's technology. But just got to remember that, especially when you're working with the dynamic range thing. But dynamic range, though, you can bring out so much stuff in it and with that post process. Oh, hey, I got some other people on here too. So it is really best for editing. I mean, in theory, not saying you cannot edit a JPEG. You can edit a JPEG, but just remember we can push a RAW file farther to the right and overexpose it on purpose if we want, or we can bring it down to the left and bring things back. So it retains that full resolution, all that good quality. And that's obviously critical if we're shooting for print or if you want to sell an image down the line. Not saying you can't sell a JPEG image. You can. It's no killer. But, the more information, again, we have, it's kind of a safety net. And I will tell you, RAW made me a little lazy of a photographer. I'll admit it. I'll show you an image here in a little bit. So can I do some stuff? I try to get it as right in camera as much as possible. But sometimes I just have to underexpose it. If I was shooting JPEG, I would never want to underexpose. That would just terrify me because I couldn't pull the detail back out of the shadows. Or I wouldn't want to overexpose a lot because then I can't pull that thing, those highlights or that overexposure back. But remember, a RAW file is not the magic fix. Like you can't be sloppy with exposure and be like, it's all black, click. Worked for me, it's RAW. I'll fix it in Photoshop, I'll fix it in Lightroom. No, you can't. You can do that to a point. But if you overexpose an image where it's too bright, even in a RAW file, there becomes a point where you can't bring it back. It's just, you walk the plank of the ship on either side, underexposed or overexposed. But, again, you also get more colors in a RAW file that you can work with, a lot more than shooting in JPEG, obviously. So a RAW file, 14, I'm not going to get into the 14-bit versus 16-bit versus 8-bit. That's a whole nother evening. But a 14-bit RAW file contains trillions of possible color connections, right? We couldn't sit here and think of 1/10 of them. So that would be great. Obviously, if we can have that color range there, let's go for it. But you're going to capture colors of an image as well as close to the truest form and sense too. But I'm not saying you can't. If you want to make your oranges pop more or the reds pop more, who says you need to make it exactly as red as you saw it with your eyeballs? It don't matter. It's art. Photography is art. That's why I call myself more of an artist these days than a photographer, because that's what we're allowed to do. The other thing too is if we're selling images, it does give us or printing for that matter, a very large file to work with. So like, I'm not going to say that you can't print big from a JPEG. If you have a photo that's properly exposed, it's not super noisy, it's sharp, that's the key, sharp. I've seen 24 by 36s and bigger out of it. Now, I have an image at St. Luke's by one of the elevators. It's 4 foot tall by 6 foot wide. It's the biggest image I've ever printed. I didn't personally print it. The lab printed it and they found somebody to do it. But that's a big freaking print. And guess what? It was a raw file, but I ended up having to make it a TIFF file, so we had a large enough, file and information. Would it have worked in JPEG? Yes, but it would have been a little less quality. But that was 4 foot tall by 6 foot long. That's freaking huge. And guess what? That was out of a 14 megapixel camera. So I'm sitting here at 24 in front of me. I've had 36 in the past. It's pretty unforgiving at that point. So again, to kind of recap, you got more dynamic range, is best for editing. You're going to get a lot more color range, and also bigger file sizes. So, you can print as pretty much as large as you want, as long as you find somebody who can print as large as you want. Oh, Paul says, is there an advantage? Whoop. Let's pop up Paul's question. So Paul says, is there an advantage to shooting JPEGs in camera as opposed to converting a RAW file in JPEG post? I would say no. That's my personal opinion, as all of this is every Saturday night. Remember that a JPEG is compressed. So let's say Paul, shoot the Badlands in a JPEG image versus a RAW. So this one's compressed, RAW is not. So we lose some information here already. So let's say we lose some detail in the sky. We've overexposed it. If I have a JPEG, I can bring probably most of it back, but there might be a point where the little tipping point to make all that sky detail come back is this RAW file. So I would say shoot RAW, so you have the largest file, have more information than you need. So again, to that thing of needing and not having. Sorry, yes, needing it and having it kind of thing, then not having it, needing it. Sure, I think I messed that up, but oh well. So yes, I would say there's an advantage to shoot the RAW file, then convert it to a JPEG. Because like, let's say for some reason we switch it and now we had JPEG and RAW, then guess what happens? We can't make a JPEG a RAW file. So it's like people will say, Justin, should I shoot the image in black and white or should I shoot it in color? Always, 100%, 200%, 500%, 1,000%. Every time I will say, shoot it in color, because color information plays a large role within black and white still conversion. So let's say you decide to, I don't know, shoot that image in a JPEG, and then you decide for some reason somebody loves it so much they want to pay $1 million and blow that puppy up real big, like 8 foot tall by 4 foot wide or something. Can a JPEG do it? Probably, but I'd rather have the RAW file with all that information that I've probably edited, brought all that information back out from the scene, and then I can go to a TIFF file, and guess what? I can make an even bigger TIFF file. Kind of a long way around your question, sorry, Paul, but yeah, if it was me, I would say shoot it in RAW, go to JPEG later. Good question. And I keep popping this up. There we are. Any other questions? I'm going to scroll through the chat here real quick. Nope. So, come on, slideshow. So, what is this? Well, PSD, that's a Photoshop file, a Lightroom file. What does this mean? I said it already, but I'll say it again. You have to have some type of software, Capture One, Photoshop, Lightroom, something that can read the RAW file. Because what happens is if you shoot RAW files, you go put them on the computer, and it doesn't read it, it's going to say file not supported. And you're going to be like, uh-oh, what's going on? So, so you have to have some way to edit it and most of all be able to read that file. So there's my warning. Pamela says, it has to be in a JPEG or a TIFF to print, correct? So 2 ways around this. Let's go situation A. You print yourself, Pamela, or I print off on my Canon Pro 100 over here. I can print a TIFF file straight from Lightroom to my Canon printer. Works fine. There's nothing there that limits me. Now, option 2 or scenario 2 is let's say there's 3 scenarios here. So one step back, I print my own. Obviously, I have no problems, like I said. Scenario 2, you go to Walgreens, Walmart, maybe Impix. I know on Lotto or like even PhotoPro at the time, you couldn't run a TIFF file through their software to get to the printers. It's just the way it was set up, it would only read JPEG. Option 3 or scenario 3 is I'm going to print, say, through my friends up at ACI in Waterloo, Cedar Falls area, or McKenna, or somewhere online that uses the ROES software, the ROES software. A lot of professional labs use it. Some have other softwares. They will allow you to load a TIFF file into their software and send it off to them to print. So those are the 3 scenarios, but you can print either way. It just depends on what situation you're sitting in. If it was me, I'm obviously going to print through a professional lab like ACI up north because there's going to be the quality there. I'm not going to have to worry about color and density and all that stuff. They'll do it for me. So good question. I love it when people have questions. So keep thinking of questions. I don't care if you've asked a question already. That is what we are here to learn. So let me show you this, right? So let's look at this image. White Sands. Can I tell it's White Sands National Park? Nope. Sure looks like a pretty nice sunburst coming over the horizon. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner of that sunburst beam, whatever you want to call it, there's 2 people. But look at our foreground. Our foreground is super underexposed. Why? I exposed for the sky because I didn't want that big sun to be a blob. I used an aperture of f16, actually f22, f22 to give me the starburst. So I waited for that sun to come down over the horizon, waited patiently, which is big for me. When I saw it there, f22, I got the starburst. But I always worry about highlights. I don't want highlights to be blown out. I will skip over an image any day if I don't have enough detail in the sky. Sorry, I don't care how pretty the foreground, the middle ground, the background is. If I've lost detail in the sky, I can't stand to look at pure white. Sorry. So I just skip it. Now, well, if I was shooting for a silhouette, sure, this is a pretty picture, you know. But look at this. Same exact image. Same exact image. What's the difference? I shoot raw. So I could bring, that's a big difference. That's very black. I bet you that's probably at least 5 stops of darkness that I brought up using a raw file. Could I do that in JPEG? Maybe. Probably. Is it going to be easier? Probably not. Works a lot quicker and faster in raw. So if you have some images, and even when you're in raw, this is where you have to know how far you can push your gear, how far I can push the camera by underexposing it or overexposing it before I just know that it's not going to work. Now, do I have several other images of that at varying exposures? Yes, it is. Could I have gone in and used a graduated neutral density over the sky and exposed for the foreground? Yes. Why didn't I do that? They were in my bag 3 feet away. I was too lazy. I was too damn lazy to do it, to be honest. So, hey, Tom, with the new camera shooting 20 frames, why do I forget to keep putting people's things up here? There we are. With the new camera shooting 20 FPM, I have a tough time editing that many images in RAW. Yes. Well, anytime that happens, I just did a wedding. Yes, I said that, a wedding for a very, very, very good friend. She's in that small club of people, but I did her wedding Tuesday, whatever day Valentine's Day was. That's what I did. My wife and I don't celebrate it before somebody says, well, you went shot a wedding and didn't do anything with your wife on Valentine's Day. We switched gifts and cards, and that's about it. So it's not big for us. So yeah, I did her wedding. And I had 706 images. I just posted them onto the computer a little bit ago. And I was shooting, I don't know, 8 frames, 7 frames, whatever it is. I don't even know what my Z6 II shoots. So yeah, with your Z9, you're blasting 20 frames a second off. So that's one of those things where you do have a lot. So if I'm shooting sports in action, that's one thing I should mention. When I shot sports, I don't shoot RAW files. I shoot JPEG. So yes, you will get a lot more RAW files. And you just got to tweet them out. So it was good to see you tonight, Tom. I don't know if you were on last week or not. It doesn't much matter. So let me pull down. So yes, obviously the more images we shoot, the more we are going to have to edit. But back to this guy. I mean, that's a big dynamic range difference. So know how far to push your camera, know how far you can push your software in conjunction with your camera, and you're golden. And all this is going to be a learning curve if you're not used to this, but you have to get over in your mindset too that when you see a raw file on the computer for the first time, if you're new to this, it's going to be like, that sigh moment. It's fine. That's why you need to learn other things like post-processing and techniques and how to bring color back, because you have to with a raw file. So disadvantages. So I told you I was going to talk about disadvantages because there's pros and cons to everything, and some are going to outweigh you. Now, the problem when you are shooting raw file, which is a perfect time, you read my mind. You said it's tough to go through that many images. Yeah, because guess what? You're shooting a lot more. What does that mean? We have to have more space. And where is that in? We got the memory card space. I've got hard drives over here, that kind of stuff. Obviously, I can fit a bajillion photos on a 8 terabyte hard drive on JPEG. Maybe can only fit half a bajillion on with RAW. It is what it is. So there are pros and cons. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine. You know, you have a bigger file size. Who cares? So as long as you're buying memory cards, now I'm big on memory cards. Like I had that 28 gig memory card. It'll very rarely go back into the camera. I don't know how it made it in there anywho when I went to White Sands. But with that card there, I don't like to put all my eggs in one basket. I still shoot 16, even with raw files. That's like 700 images, maybe less-ish, at 24 megapixels. Because if I lose a card goes corrupt, I don't lose an entire freaking shoot or photo. Or like, why would I want to fly all the way down, spend 4 days, 2 days travel time, 2 days, hitting the ground running time in White Sands and lose all my images? I'd rather lose a couple hundred than all 1,832, if I remember right, that I did. So again, you're going to have to buy bigger memory cards, which they are a little bit more expensive. I mean, 6432s are dirt cheap these days. But in the world of you get into some of these cards now, you can get 512 megabyte or 512 megabyte. That holds nothing. 512 gigabyte. Gigabyte is bigger than megabyte. Or gigabytes, yes, it is bigger than megabytes. But that's, that's a huge card, but they're very expensive. Now that we're getting into the world of CFast cards and XQD cards, and we're not going to the old CF cards, those dumb things are way expensive too. Even 20% is enough discount for me to buy a stupid CFast card for my camera, but it is what it is. I have one, and that's where it shall stay. Everything else is SD at the moment. But again, more money for bigger cards because you're going to have to compensate for that lower cards. Now, I'm not saying you can't shoot a 2 gigabyte card if you have it or an 8 gig. I mean, go for it. Why don't go dumping everything just to get bigger cards? The other thing is not only that you're going to be, filling memory cards, but like I mentioned, we're filling hard drive spaces in general. If you save everything, it can help us with that is stop being digital hoarders. I do it. If it's not blurry, may not be compositionally great or exposure great. If it's not like a stinker where I need to throw it in the garbage, I keep it, unfortunately. That's how it works. So, but I'm glad I do that because I've gone back to images. I did this last week. I sat here and went through images, I don't know, from Glacier back in June. There's a couple I liked that I just skipped over. I mean, when you're going through 1,800 plus images at a time, you miss things. Just the nature of the beast. The other thing is you have to have a processing workflow. My workflow process is pretty much the only thing that stays consistent is how I import and how I export. Everything in between is a hot mess. It's like a squirrel. It's like, ooh, over here, ooh, over here. There are certain things I always do. I always set the profile that I shot in camera in Lightroom. So if I used a camera landscape, I go into Lightroom and select camera landscape. Now, that's another thing with RAW. Let's talk white balance real quick. If you have a JPEG and your white balance is off, yes, you can fix it to an extent. RAW, I can change whatever I want. So when I have a RAW file, and I think this is an advantage of RAW files too. Let's say I've done it at a wedding. Inside, I have my white balance set to the T, 110% correct. I used to do a lot of weddings by myself. I ran out of the church and blasting all these photos away of the bride and groom coming out, and they're getting pegged with whatever people throw at weddings these days. And guess what? I realized they are freaking blue as blue can be. Did I freak out? Nope, because I can correct that in Lightroom. I can go over here and sit on the computer and I can click that white balance button and it drops down all my options for white balance. I can change it to tungsten if I want. I can change it to sun, auto. Sometimes like white sands is really hard to nail the white balance. So now I have all those options there. Or like, let's say I shot my JPEG on a camera profile of flat. Some people like camera flat. I don't. I just read an article recently saying why you should shoot camera flat, so I may try it for a short time. But guess what? If I can't edit that and I can't do whatever in a JPEG, I can do it in a RAW. I can change that. I'm like, oh man, I meant to shoot it on portrait or landscape. It'll pop up. Connie says, I think mine, and I keep not, boy, let me slap my hand here. So Connie says, I think my D500 can capture different different size RAW files. I don't understand the purpose. So good point. That was about in my mind about 25 minutes ago, and I forgot to bring it up. So thank you, Connie. So what Connie is meaning that her D500, D850 will do it. My Z6 II, most cameras will do it. Even I think all the way back to the D7000 for sure. And probably before that. Well, D7000 for sure on up. So what Connie is saying is, she doesn't understand the point of why you have that. So let's say you're shooting a RAW file and you want to conserve space because we've got all these hard drives floating around on memory cards. You can shoot if you go in and you can shoot JPEG small, medium, large, you can also do that with a RAW file. I don't know of any other purpose beyond, I don't claim to know everything. There's probably more reasons for that, but the reason I see a lot of people do it from experience is files. They don't want to have a bunch of big files, so they will shoot RAW medium instead of small or large. I just shoot the RAW file as is because I don't see a point in shooting it lower because I have a big enough card. I don't think I've ever dropped it down, to be honest. So it is, but good question, Connie. So it's really pretty much, in my opinion, is for you to save file space. So if you want, you could test it. I'm thinking I'd be correct as if you shoot a RAW small, RAW medium, and RAW large, then you would, if you open up the file size and make sure you do the same scene with all three, you should have different file sizes. One might be 10 megabytes, one might be 20, one might be 30. So good question, Connie. And I keep bringing that up. Man, there we are. Little sticky fingers on the keys this evening. So RAW or JPEG? Like I said, I get that question all the time. Should I shoot RAW? Should I shoot JPEG? Well, if you have scenario one where I don't have Lightroom, I don't have Photoshop, then I guess you're kind of hands tied to shoot JPEG. Now, I will say, I know some people who say, I'm really into photography, but I'm new at this. I don't want to deal with RAW files, but I'm going on a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Glacier or Africa or wherever. And I'm not ready to edit photos a lot. I don't have that knowledge base yet. They'll shoot RAW. There's no reason you can't shoot RAW and edit them 10 years down the road. It's not like we have to. It's not like they spoil or anything. So, if you're new and you're a beginner and you're watching this, it's okay to shoot JPEG, like I said in the beginning. Maybe that's another reason why you would shoot JPEG and RAW. So you have a RAW file for a future purpose, and you don't need it right now. Nothing wrong with it. Maybe you want to shoot all RAW, like most of us are doing here. It's that kind of thing. I don't like to tell people, like, just because I shoot RAW, you need to shoot RAW. I don't poo-poo on people because they shoot JPEG. It's up to you. It's totally up to you and what you feel comfortable with, what you want to do. But I would say, if you do shoot RAW, there's a little bit of a learning curve to it. But you know what? I always say, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. If you're not sitting in front of the computer, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And guess what? It's going to force you to call me and ask me a question or take a lesson with me, or it's going to push you to go out and watch a YouTube video, right? Well, guess what it did? We've hit a stumbling block, a roadblock that we cannot get over as a hurdle at that moment. It teaches us to learn. And I think with this whole photography thing, I despise, and I've said it before, despise people who say, well, I'm done learning. I don't need to learn. I know all of it. Nobody's going to know all of it, ever. So as long as we keep learning new techniques, things like that, RAW file is going to help with those as well. Any other quick questions before I get to my last slide? So like I said, JPEG, RAW, your choice. Go for it. But you got to remember, have Lightroom or Photoshop. Any other questions? No, not at all. Okay. And if something pops up here, let me know. Come on. So, late night exposures that are coming up, and I think I forgot a slide. Oh, Tom says, okay. Let's see here. Okay, so if I have the newest technology, do my JPEG images have less or more data than my old D300? Shouldn't. Nothing that I've ever come across, Tom. You might have better dynamic range in your new camera, in your Z9, things like that. So therefore, you might have a little bit more on the JPEG side, but I'm not going to say that a JPEG file from 20 years ago is less better than current, maybe slightly in some form, but it's a good question. I mean, like I said, I don't claim to know everything, but I wouldn't see why in any sense or form that I can think of. Another question. I love questions. Here we are. If I'm going to print at Walgreens, can I go from RAW back to JPEG? Yeah, so if you've got a RAW file already, you can change it over to JPEG. So you'll export it out of Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, whatever software, XYZ. You can make it go from a RAW. Oh, wait, sorry. Let me read this right. If you go from RAW back to JPEG. Maybe I need some clarification. So if you can go from RAW and go JPEG, that's why I shoot RAW. Because if I go JPEG, I can't go back to RAW. Just because the camera saves that file format, I can't go back. So hopefully I answered the question, Mary Lynn, either way. More questions. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Only one lens to bring tomorrow to color the wind, 24-70 or 70-200. Ooh, good question, Pamela. Both, no. I don't know. Let's put it this way. What do you want to shoot? Do you want to shoot detail shots, or do you want to shoot that grand wide scene? I mean, if I want to tell you to bring both, honestly, because if we're trying to tell a story within a scene, we want that grand scene, wide angle, 24-70. But, that's hard. Because I'm taking all my gear tomorrow, all 3 lenses. But I will tell you, most of the time, I shoot a 70-200, honestly, on lots of things. So I would say if you're going to do lots of detail shots and you just want to shoot kites in the sky, then sure, up close, 70-200. Or if there's a kite way out in the distance and, you can still use that 70-200 for there. I think 24-70 might be a little too wide if you're trying to shoot detail shots. So Tom asks, was film photography closer to RAW? I think so, what a lot of people say. I mean, if you look at a lot of things, there's more, a negative had a lot more oomph to it, and things you could pull out and that kind of thing. It had more of I think in film world, we call it latitude or height or dynamic range. Yeah, I would say film was probably very close more to RAW. It's when we started getting RAW files, that was like I said, a RAW file is like a digital negative, really. It's how you captured it, but there is still some information there. Same with the negative. Any other questions? Nope. So I did. How did I? Boy, I messed up my slideshow tonight. Sorry. So I usually have what's coming up. So next week. Oh yes. So next weekend is whatever date it is. I'm horrible at dates. So I apologize. I'm going to do it on Sunday night next week because I'm going to be gone in Omaha. I was going to go back to, we're going to my mom's. We're going to go to a thingamajigger somewhere. And then I'm actually going to go with a photographer that I know, Facebook friend, we'll call him that, Michael. I could probably call him a friend in real life, but not the digital world. But him and I are going to go out to dinner Saturday night down in Omaha, and I'm going to talk fine art with him. I got some questions. The guy is freaking amazing. Michael Surzio, if I pronounced his name right. You may see him like a few of my things. Amazing photographer. Very, very good at what he does, and especially his black and white fine art stuff. So we're going to go chat over that because is Chris Jennings on here tonight? Chris, are you on here tonight? I assumed you would have asked a question if you were. No. Tom says, I will be ice fishing at Clear Lake tomorrow. Why is everybody's at Clear Lake? Pamela's at Clear Lake. I'm at Clear Lake. What's her name? Lindsay. one of my clients. She's going to be there tomorrow. Everybody's at Clear Lake. It must be the place to be this weekend. But no, we're going to meet for dinner, and I didn't want to rush back and then miss it and have people sitting here waiting for things not occurring. So at that point, so I will do it next Sunday at 8 to 9 p.m. We're going to talk about macro photography. It's like, I think the last time I checked a couple days ago, it's like 36 less days till spring, right? So let's talk about warmth, and we'll just talk about basics, some gear you can use for macro photography. I watched a presentation last night at Paul's Photo with Nissi. They have a really cool close-up filter now that goes on your lens. Check out Nissi filters. Pretty good filters. They're kind of new to the U.S. They've been around elsewhere in the world for a while, but Nissi filters, pretty cool. Then I think it's the 4th or the 3rd, whatever the first Saturday of March is. A little bit different live. I'm going live Saturday night as usual, but I'm going at 7, not 8 p.m. And I'm doing I don't want to call it a presentation, but it's going to be photo related, so you can come and ask your photo questions. But it's going to be about kind of the stories behind pictures of white sands and the things I took in New Mexico and Mesilla, New Mexico, some things out by Alamogordo that I took on the way back to camp. So it's kind of behind like why I took the photo, why I like it kind of thing. If you got a technical question, throw it out there. As always, I'll answer it. But if you got a lot of friends that just like looking at photos, tell them to come on over. I go live now, if you don't know, on 3 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, and then also my personal Facebook page now, because I pay to have up to 5. So why not use 3? So Pamela says white balance would be an interesting subject. Yeah, I've actually, I plan on having March. Let me go through that a little bit. So March, obviously, I'll talk white sands, New Mexico trip. Everybody's chomping at the bit to see images. You've probably seen a few here, and if you're on last week's. But I'm going to have them all up there now for most of them. Little bit of black and white and color images. Then the following week, we are going to do the makeup. When I was at White Sands, we were going to do putting art back in fine art. I may have a couple surprises for you guys on that. So tune in. I won't tell you what they are quite yet. They are both in the works and not set in stone. So I don't get everybody all excited. And then I've got lots of ideas. So Pamela, that is awesome. Oh, thank you. God bless you too, Tom. So maybe we'll run into each other somewhere. You never know. We still need to go out for coffee. But I've got, I have a whole litany of lists of things that I came up with to talk about. Composition. That's one that I'll probably be coming up with. Oh, duh, it's right here on my phone. That's why we have these fancy things, right? So I'm going to throw a couple of these out because we still got some time, and I like feedback because I do this for you, not for me. But I will say I was like a little schoolgirl this evening. I got all excited and antsy like about 10 minutes before. So, yes. So right now, these are all tentative dates, but March 18th, I want to do, let's go back. Fine art reschedule, be the 11th for sure. Long exposure photography. So anything long exposure, water, nights, I'm not going to talk about night because we kind of talked about night. So I'm going to talk about neutral density filters, graduated neutral densities, using all those creatively. So we'll do that on 3/18. I was thinking back to maybe in April doing one like making versus taking photographs. Like let's actually use the thought process to make a photograph versus just snippety snip, click, click. Finding the extraordinary in the ordinary is an idea I have. So kind of just give you some basic tips on how you go to some boring place and try to pull out something cool. Obviously, compositional techniques to improve your photographs. Those are a couple up there. So if you have any ideas, comment on any of my Facebook posts, send me messages, wherever you're at. As always, if we have no more questions, I thank you. As always, I'm most appreciative that everybody tunes in every Saturday night or Friday night or Sunday night, I guess, whenever I did it. But I promise I'm really hoping to get back on schedule every Saturday night. And keep rolling with them. But I am very thankful for all you guys. I wouldn't do it, like I said, I don't do it for me. I do it for you. You guys are always coming and supporting me, so therefore I will keep doing it. If you didn't catch my Facebook post this week, I got so many irons in the fire. I'm just killing the podcast because I always tell people you need to be passionate about what you do. And sitting in front of that desk over there, talking to no one into that box and that microphone and editing it is not my passion. I don't like it. I've come down to truly just despise it. So I'm not going to do it because that's going to show in my end product. So I'd rather put my time into these lives because you guys show up and do it. So I will stop rambling. You are welcome, Pamela. As always, thank you guys for the support. So if you got questions, shoot them over to me. You know where to find me. If you got some ideas for like Hamilton white balance, or I don't know, whatever you guys can conjure up ideas, shoot them to me. I mean, I might not get to them the next month or 2 months, but I literally over here on this board, I've got a litany of things I write down and keep track of. And when I need something to pull up, I go to the board. I'm driving down the road. I tell, hey, Siri, do this for me. And she does it. So put some notes down for me. So awesome. Again, thank you guys. And like I said, we will be back on next Sunday and we will go from there. So thank you guys. You have a wonderful evening as always.